friends, and welcome back to another video. Today I am taking you through a tour of some of my favorite and most used art supplies. I'll be walking through a variety of different media as well as tools and some books and guides that I love to use in my work. So thanks so much for joining me, and I hope you enjoy. Alright, let's get started. So first up, let's start with paper. My favorite brand of watercolor paper to use, and it is my go-to, and I've said it before, but it's the Canson brand, cold pressed watercolor paper. I'll get it in a variety of different sizes of pads, small to large, but sometimes I like the large because I can do larger pieces, but then I can also cut down the paper to different smaller sizes if I need to. But it's a great paper. I love how watercolor goes on, as well as other mediums like colored pencil and gouache. Everything goes on so smoothly. I love how the watercolor dries and bleeds on it. I love this light texture. It's really nice and thick paper, and it is my go-to. I always stock up, and I've tried other brands, but this has just been my tried and true, and I love using it. In terms of sketchbooks, my current favorite right now that I'm using is my journal made by my friend Kaya from Dustling and Heart. I will link her Instagram and shop below, but she hand makes all of her sketchbooks and journals. They're beautifully made with really good quality materials. The paper is really smooth and thick. It's great for a variety of different media, from dry to wet in my experience. I can do basically anything on this paper, and it dries just fine and doesn't bleed through to the other side. I love the raw edge on all of the pages, and how sturdy and well made it is. It is my go-to travel sketchbook, as well as the sketchbook I go to play around with, try different media, as well as smaller paintings. On to paint. I have two favorite watercolor brands. The first is Winsor & Newton. This is my larger 24 color palette. From them, I think I've had this about 2 years, and I haven't had to replace any of the colors yet except for white. It goes on so smoothly, it is so pigmented, blends well, it's high quality, really good watercolor paint. I use this every single time I create a painting or anything. It is my go-to palette. The second palette I love to use, and the brand I love, is a small business called Redwood Willow. The lady who runs the shop hand makes all of her watercolors. She makes lots of beautiful earth-toned paints, and has these really fun wood or metal palettes that you can put the little paint pans in. Most of these are from Redwood Willow. I have a couple of those greens, are Winsor & Newton actually, but her palette is a great palette to take traveling if I need something small to fit into my backpack, and has a lovely variety of neutrals and earth tone colors that I love to use. My favorite palette that I have for mixing watercolor paint or my gouache paint is this handmade ceramic palette from Sugar House Ceramic Co. They are another small business that I love to support. It is beautifully made. I love the smooth glaze over top. I love the look of it. It's very aesthetically pleasing. The paint blends so smoothly on top of the ceramic material, and it cleans really easy. Even with acrylic paint, that acrylic and gouache paint that dries onto the palette, you just give it a good soak in warm water and soap and it'll come right off, which is super nice. The other tool I love to have when painting is just a reusable washcloth or rag to wipe my paintbrushes on. Rather, I used to use paper towels, but that is just a waste and not so great for the environment. So I have switched over to a reusable washcloth or a towel, and it works great. And they kind of dry really pretty. For paint brushes, most of my favorite paintbrushes that I love to use are also from Sugar House Ceramic Co. They hand make all of these brushes, at least the handles, which is really cool depending on where their location was. The first couple that I purchased, they were in Vermont, and so the paintbrush handles were made from maple branches that they had around their property. And then the second bunch of brushes I recently purchased, they are currently in Nova Scotia, so the handles are made from the driftwood that they find on the beaches near where they are staying. So they're super sturdy, super well made, and look awesome, and I absolutely love to use them. I also have a couple of more detailed, tiny bristled brushes, and I don't really pay attention to the brands for other kind of brushes like this. I'm not the best caretaker of my paintbrushes, so I usually just buy the middle grade brand of brushes and then replace them as often as I need to. But I love a good tiny detailed brush. And then lastly, for paint tools and supplies, I just use for water, I just use a thrifted mason jar. This is a great option to use for holding water for mixing paint. And then this other cup that I have is a travel cup that I got for Christmas one year that I absolutely love. It is from the brand Faber-Castell. You can smash it down and then pop it up whenever you need to use it. It's a great travel cup to use. You can just stick it in your backpack, pop it open, pour in your water, and then you can just shrink it back down and put it back in your backpack. It's great, and I use it all the time. For pencils, I don't really use anything too fancy. I just love using a basic mechanical pencil. That's what I love to use for sketching and base layers for when I do paintings. These are some of my favorites right now. The mustard colored one was from Sugar House Ceramic Co. They have a bunch of art supplies on their website that they sell, and then the pink one is just from Target. Any kind of mechanical pencil works great for me. For outlining and detail work, my favorite pens to use are from Micron. These pens work great. They're waterproof, so they don't smudge when you're painting over them. They're great for fine lines and detail work. My favorite sizes are the 01 and the 005. Those give the most fine and detailed lines possible, which I love to use in my work. I do find that they run out of ink pretty quickly, so I do have to replace them quite often, but overall they're my go-to. Now this is a new media that I have currently been exploring and playing with. These are markers that I recently purchased and had talked about in a little art haul from the brand Artist Loft at Michael's. They have just been really fun to play with, and I really am liking the pigmentation and blending abilities of these markers. They're great on their own, or for what I've loved is using them for base layers and colors underneath, like a mixed media painting. These markers have two sides, a more rounded tip side as well as a chisel tip thicker side, where you can get both thick lines and thin lines, which is nice. Colored pencils is another media I love to use, especially over top watercolor and gouache. The two favorite brands that I love using, one is Faber-Castell. I just love their color choices and price point. They're a nice quality brand, but for not super expensive. They go on really smoothly, and I love how they work over top watercolor especially. The other brand I love to use is Prismacolor. They're a little bit more on the expensive side, but I was lucky enough to have inherited all of the Prismacolor pencils that I currently have from my uncle, and I haven't needed to replace any because I have so many, but they go on really smooth, they blend really great, and they're just a great high quality colored pencil brand. For gouache, I have recently been experimenting and learning about how to use acrylic gouache. This is the first set of 2 paints that I've gotten of gouache. This is from the brand Turner. And I think the color set was from their Japanese line. I just liked the mixed colors more than the other generic set that they have. This one looks like it's more expensive online. It kind of varies in price, it goes up and down, but I really liked the mixed colors of these, and I'm really happy with the quality of both straight from the tube onto paper, really opaque, it's very nice, as well as when watered down, more like watercolor. I especially love to use the white, especially for final touches and details on top of paintings. As you can see, I need to replace my current tube. The last media I'm going to be sharing with you is oil pastel. This is another one I love to use and play with, especially in my sketchbook, as well as over top watercolor specifically. This is one of my favorite palettes, if you will, that I have gotten so far. It's just a lovely range of earth tone colors. The quality is great, and I've loved using these. I believe I got this set on Amazon, and it was very affordable. On to different kinds of tools that I love using when painting. For sketching, the 2 erasers that I love using, this is just the general tri-tip eraser. You could find that at any art store. I find that it's the best one to do a clean erasing of the pencil, literally taking off every part of the graphite and then without ripping up the paper underneath. This funky eraser is called the Kneadable Art Eraser. I use this to lift off the darker layers of graphite from a sketch before I paint over top, so that the pencil doesn't really come through very much. So when I've completed my sketch for underneath my painting, I will use this eraser to dab on top, and it lifts off a lot of the darker bits of the graphite, and it leaves a very faint and light sketch underneath. It's also really fun to play with. Some other go-to tools I love to have are just pencil sharpeners. Here's 2 that I love to use. Any brand works, obviously, but they're just, the small ones are handy to have right beside you when you're working with colored pencils or working on a piece. Another tool I love to use is masking fluid. This is something where when you paint this first, whatever paint you put over top will be left white once you rub the masking fluid off of the paper once it's dried. So this is usually something I'll use for some fine details in paintings, or if there's something that I don't want touched with color at all, I will use masking fluid. So you paint that on your paper before you do any sort of painting over top, let that dry, then you paint over top of it and let the paint dry, and then once that's all dry you can rub it off the paper and you're left with a clean white line or drawing. Another tool that I love to use is just masking tape. I use this to outline the edge of a piece if I really want some clean edges at the end. So I'll use this both in my sketchbook or on top of my watercolor paper if I'm doing a piece on there, if I'm wanting those clean edges when I'm finished. Lastly, the other little tool that I like using mainly in my sketchbook are these small binder clips. I use these to clip down both sides of the journal to clamp down the pages so that I have a more flat and open sketchbook. It makes it a little bit easier for painting. This is just a set I got at Target. I like the various sizes, especially the small ones, along with the cute colors. Finally, a couple of art books that I'd love to recommend and share that I love using and browsing through to learn from. First is Colors of the West by Molly Hashimoto. It is an artist's guide to nature's palette. She does a beautiful job of showcasing how to mix color from nature and from what you see. She's great at nature sketching and journaling. I've learned a lot from that. She's just got beautiful paintings and has a beautiful eye of capturing nature through watercolor painting. Second is Drawing Wild Animals by Oana Beffert. This is more like a drawing guide on how to draw certain kinds of animals. She gives a wide variety and range from safari to jungle to desert and forest, all sorts of different kinds. She does a great job of explaining how to draw each one, giving you basic shapes and understanding of each animal's anatomy, which is great for future when you're trying to know how to draw something from memory. She also talks about conservation and how to treat nature with care and respect and value, as well as saving species. Finally, this was a book I picked up at Powell's, a used book, so I'm not quite sure if it's a print. Probably is, and I'm sure you could find it at a used bookstore or maybe Amazon or like Abe's Books, half-price books online, or if you live locally, at Powell's. It's called Creating Textures in Pen and Ink with Watercolor by Claudia Nice. She is an incredible artist. And as I love to do mixed media, she does a great job of explaining how to do mixed media of ink and watercolor, how to draw and ink first with pen, how to get textures and shadows and detail with pen first, and then watercoloring over top. It's a great resource and another great book, I think, to have if you're interested in watercolor and ink. Well, that is it for my favorite and most used art supplies tour. I hope you enjoyed and maybe have found some new things that you'd like to try in your collection of tools, or if you're a beginner, hopefully this will give you an idea of some of the things that you might want to start out with. I would say all of these things are great things to experiment with or start out with as a beginner artist. I totally encourage trying out different media. It's just so fun to play with different kinds, and it can spark inspiration out of anywhere and can lead you to things you didn't think you'd love. Like for me, oil pastel was one that I didn't know that I would love so much. Anyway, I thank you so much for joining me, and I hope you enjoyed, and I will see you in the next one. Bye, friends.